In this video, I'm going to show you an opening trap so powerful, it can completely destroy your opponents right from the start. This deadly setup has even left top players stunned, and with it, you can gain a serious advantage before your opponent even knows what's happening. I've divided the video into parts and added a bonus lesson at the end for alternative options if the position doesn't land on the board as you'd like. We're starting with the black pieces, and the opening seems pretty standard at first. White begins with e4, and we answer with e5. They play knight f3, we counter with knight c6. White brings out their bishop to c4, and we develop with knight f6. But then, bam! White plays knight g5, launching what's famously known as the fried liver attack. Now, White's knight eyes the vulnerable f7 pawn, and many players think they've got us cornered. But here's where we show them who's boss. Instead of panicking, we play bishop c5, cool as a cucumber. It might look like we've blundered material, but trust me, this is a trap worth setting. If White dares to capture on f7, we hit back with bishop takes f2, check. Now the fun really begins. White has options, but no matter what they choose, they're in for a wild ride. If White's king moves to f1, there's no escape from the incoming storm. If they recapture our bishop with their king, king takes f2, we strike with knight takes central pawn, delivering another check. Now the white king is on the run, and its escape routes are limited. It has 6 potential squares, but here's the kicker. Only g1 and e3 give White a fighting chance. If the king steps to e3, we're practically guaranteed to win 90% of the time. If it ventures to f3, we bring out the big guns with queen to f6, forcing the king into chaos in the center. We also have pawn to d5 in our arsenal, which almost seals the deal, turning the position into a near checkmate. White is officially in hot water. If the king moves to f1, the next queen move is no longer to f6 as it was previously, which directly checked the king on f3. Since the king has shifted to f1, the queen can now block in these positions. In this case, we play queen to h4. Keep the move queen to h4 in mind because it will occur frequently in these types of positions. If White tries to save the day with queen to f3, attacking our knight, we respond with a killer move, knight to d4. Suddenly, their queen is under threat, and oh, by the way, we're setting up an unstoppable checkmate too. From here, we'll gradually bring our rook into the action, likely moving it to f8 for maximum pressure. By this point, White's position is crumbling faster than a cookie under a toddler's hand. The best strategy for our opponent is to keep their king hidden. If we play queen to h4, their only solid reply is g3. We respond with knight takes g3, and if they capture with h takes g3, we deliver a check with our queen. The king moves to f1, and we protect our rook, likely with rook to f8. At this moment, we're down 3 points in material, but the tide is about to turn. We play d5, sacrificing our central pawn to free up the bishop for an attack on their queen. With the bishop unleashed and their knight under significant pressure, the game becomes chaotic in our favor. Breaking the connection here is crucial. Once the bishop moves out, our knight jumps into action, increasing the pressure on their now vulnerable king. If the king moves to e3, we can't play queen to g5 for a check since their knight would capture it. However, the move queen to h4 becomes pivotal again. If g3 appears, we must capture and deliver a check. This is critical because the king has no safe squares. Should the king retreat to e2, we seize the opportunity to take on c4, creating a fork. This clever move allows us to regain the material we've sacrificed while leaving their king in a precarious position. If their pawn advances, a swift checkmate in 2 moves is possible. For instance, moving the queen to f4, forcing the king to e2, followed by queen to f2 ends the game decisively. Winning with the black pieces in just 9 moves is incredibly satisfying and surprisingly achievable. Now let's dive into my favorite line, one that might inspire you to try the Traxler attack. If we play queen to h4 and their queen emerges, we retreat our knight to prepare a tactical masterpiece. This setup allows us to play knight to d4, targeting their queen and bishop simultaneously. In games I've seen, it often goes like this. Knight takes rook, and then we leap back in with knight to attack the queen. If the queen moves to g3 offering a trade, we respond with knight to f5, forking their pieces and ultimately capturing the queen. If the opponent defensively retreats their queen to f1, we shift gears beautifully. Playing d5 puts pressure on their bishop. Then knight to g4 checks their king. If the king shifts, we follow up with knight to f2. Should the king keep moving, we land knight to e2 check, forcing their queen to capture. Finally, our queen glides to the center, completing the trap and sealing the game with style. This sequence ends with queen to d4 checkmate, perfectly executed in the center of the board, with the king trapped by its own pieces. The position is rich with traps, but it's important to remember that White doesn't always have to fall into them. All these complications start here, and I'll even rewind to show you the alternative. So good thing you stayed with the video. King to f1 is considered the critical move since our queen is under attack and we can't deliver a check. The best best move here is to get the queen out of danger. White should naturally go ahead and capture our rook, but we don't slow down. We play pawn to d5, setting up a deadly attack. If white captures the pawn, the bishop moves to g4, trapping the queen completely. Protected by the knight, the bishop seals the queen's fate. Congratulations, you win in just 8 moves. However, if white plays pawn takes d5, we jump in with the knight. Now, even though we're down 6 points of material, the pressure we've built is immense. The bishop still can't be captured, and white's position begins to crumble. In many games, I've seen white attempt c3, trying to kick the knight out. Here's where we strike with bishop to g4, targeting the queen. The queen's only escape is to check us, and we respond with the sneaky knight to d7, the silent killer. From this point, the game is practically over. If white takes on f2, we bring the queen into play and relentlessly chase the king. If they capture our knight instead, we slide the queen to f6, and there's no one to save their king. For example, if d takes a5, we push the queen forward, maintaining the attack. If their pawn advances, we capture it and deliver a decisive checkmate on f2. The Traxler is loaded with this kind of power, but there's a critical line to address: the best response from white. The most testing move is to sacrifice the pawn and counterattack our queen. This forces us into sharp play, and I'm about to show you 26 moves of engine theory where white emerges slightly better. If your opponent knows this line, they're either using a computer or have memorized this video. We take with the queen, and the best move for white is knight to f7. We retreat the queen to c5, targeting the bishop on c4. White plays pawn to d3, and we continue with bishop to g4, attacking the queen. After queen to d2, the bishop slides to safety. White develops with knight to c3, and we push b5, sacrificing material to activate our position. White's only correct response here is b4, an intricate pawn sacrifice to target our queen. Instead of capturing, we retreat the queen and maneuver with precision. Sacrifices on d5, silent retreats, and devastating forks dominate the rest of this computer-driven sequence. Eventually, white sacrifices their queen to reach a playable endgame, where black has a queen and pawns against white's coordinated minor pieces. Does this scenario sound likely in your games? Not really, but I included it for the few commenters who'd claim I didn't cover every line. The truth is, this opening doesn't win automatically. One final line we haven't addressed. What if white doesn't take on f7 with the knight? Instead, they might try bishop takes f7, considered the best move against the Traxler. I'll show you that even this doesn't give white an easy game. Just because someone reads a computer line or watches a video doesn't mean they'll execute it perfectly. Playing it out in real time is always a different challenge. In this position, we play king to a7, and the fun part is that it feels like a mini bomb cloud. Moving the king to a7 forces white to move their bishop to one of 3 safe squares. If white decides to castle instead of moving the bishop, we can simply play h6, winning the knight because it can no longer defend the bishop. At this point, congratulations, you're about to win a piece. Now the bishop has to retreat. The mainline move is bishop to d5, though I've never fully understood it. Let's say instead white moves the bishop back to c4, its original square, or to b3. Personally, I recommend b3 because it avoids the d5 pawn push, which could attack the bishop. Even if the bishop lands on b3, the next 5 moves for black are straightforward and can almost be pre-moved. Start by playing rook f8 to prevent white's knight from jumping to f7. White's best response is to castle. If white plays something like knight to c3 instead, there's a great plan to follow. After knight c3 or castling, you can set up with d6, h6, bishop to g4, and slide your queen to g6. This plan takes advantage of the open diagonal created by white taking your f7 pawn earlier. In an ideal scenario, your setup might look like this. White castles, you play d6, white plays d3, and then you move the queen to g6. If white's knight retreats, you get to take the initiative, pushing knight to d4 and putting immense pressure on white. The absence of the f7 pawn also opens the f-file for your rook, and your king can eventually move back to d8, where it's completely safe. Even though this line is objectively favorable for white, it's challenging for them to play correctly. For white, the best plan is to move the bishop out of danger and aim to push c3 and d4, even at the cost of a pawn. Controlling the center and keeping black's king exposed is critical for white's strategy. From black's perspective, after rook f8, bring your queen into the attack, push d6, develop the bishop actively, and start an aggressive attack. The resulting positions are incredibly dynamic. Every piece contributes to the attack, and all this activity comes at the cost of just one pawn, an amazing trade-off. There's another line worth mentioning here. If white plays d4 after knight g5 and bishop c5, it's an interesting idea to note. The point of d4 is to open up space and create a new threat. If you face this, simply respond with d5. If white takes on d5, recapture with the knight, and you're in a great position because the bishop's line of attack is now blocked. If white tries something like d6, hoping to open the position, just castle. You're not concerned about such attempts. 2 active pieces easily outclass the sacrifice material. Overall, these lines show showcase how energetic Black's play can be in the Traxler counterattack, with every piece coming alive for just the cost of a pawn. In this position, you might encounter the rare line of d4 followed by d5. While it's uncommon, I figured it's worth mentioning for the few of you who've made it this far. Shout out to those who stick around for the entire video. If you face d4, simply respond with d5. This shuts down White's plans effectively and ensures you're still in control. Now let's move into some additional ideas to expand your repertoire. After e4 and e5, not all games will lead to the Traxler counterattack. Sometimes White will play more standard openings like the Scotch. Against the Scotch, I recommend taking the pawn. If White recaptures, there's an exciting trick, queen to h4. This line is tricky and aggressive, and the point is to put immediate pressure on White. If White plays g3, you have a strong response. Similarly, if White plays knight to c3, you can play bishop to b4, pinning the knight. If your opponent is exceptionally well prepared, they might know that the best response is to sacrifice a pawn and attack aggressively with knight to b5. But that's okay. The goal here is to give you sharp, fun ideas for attacking early in the game. This approach ensures you maintain an exciting, dynamic position, even in seemingly quiet games. It's a fantastic way to stay on the attack and keep your games engaging and full of possibilities. The Traxler is absolutely vicious. Did you see some of those mates? It's wild how powerful this opening can be. Now, the best way to master these ideas is to practice. Focus on getting those queen moves perfect in the right variations. Remember, checkmates are fun, but winning because you played correctly is even better. As a bonus for sticking around, check out these 5 chess openings will make you win at chess. It's packed with openings to dominate your games. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for new videos.